That afternoon, when the sun was still hanging halfway behind the western mountain range, the entire village had already begun to sink into a pale yellow light, thin and cold like a layer of ash coating dying embers. The stilt houses lay scattered along the slope, some high, some low, their backs leaning against the forest, their faces turned toward the cornfields, rustling in the wind. The red dirt road winding through the village was still wet from a light midday rain, jagged rocks jutting out, patches of slippery mud and sunken ruts, the ground still stamped with the tracks of water buffaloes, sandals and firewood. Carts. Normally at this hour, the women would have started calling their children home for dinner. The men would be carrying their hoes down from the fields, and the kitchen smoke from every house would rise, mingling with the smell of roasted corn, fresh rice, dried buffalo dung, and the pungent scent of forest leaves. But today that peace was torn apart by a scream from a house sitting midway up the slope. The cries of a woman in labor were at first suppressed in her throat, sounding like groans of endurance, but they grew longer, hoarser, and more fractured, as if the life inside her belly was using both hands to claw at its mother's flesh. Demanding to be born, the family ran around in a panic. The white-haired mother-in-law, her hair disheveled, carried a basin of hot water, her hands shaking so badly that the water splashed out. The rising steam flushed her face red, while her eyes were wide and white with terror. The father-in-law sat by the hearth, trying to chop more firewood, but the blade kept slipping from his grip. His mouth mumbled, calling upon the ancestors, the mountain gods, and names that had long lain beneath the earth. The young husband stood just outside the curtain separating the room, pacing endlessly back and forth, his hands constantly pulling at his hair, rubbing it together, or reaching up as if to pull the curtain back, only to be stopped by his father. He listened to his wife's screams, his face growing paler by the minute, because in this village childbirth wasn't just a matter of a woman's pain, it was a doorway. People believed that when a child was about to leave its mother's womb, a tiny crack would open in the middle of the house, bridging the two realms. The mother's blood, the amniotic fluid, the groans, the first cry, the scent of breast milk not yet fully formed. All of these brought joy to the living, but they also awakened the cold things waiting out in the forest. Because of this, the midwife had to be someone with a steady hand and a strong spirit. Someone who knew exactly when to call for hot water, when to stoke the fire, when to place a knife under the pillow, and when to plant incense on the porch so the starving spirit wouldn't follow the scent of blood inside. And in this village the only person people trusted was the old midwife who lived at the end of the cornfield, right by the path leading to the cemetery. The young husband couldn't bear it anymore. He snatched a torch, dashed out the door, and sprinted down the slippery dirt path, as if the darkness behind were chasing him. He ran so fast he nearly slipped several times, his breath hissing through his teeth, his eyes constantly looking back toward his house, where his wife's screams still echoed in waves, weaker now, hoarser, as if he feared that if he were just one step too slow by the time he returned, the house would be devoid of human voices. When he came back, the sky had darkened. In front was him, torch in hand, face drenched in sweat. Behind him was a woman completely shrouded in a headscarf, carrying a black cloth sack slung over her shoulder, the dark hem of her shirt sweeping over the roadside grass, walking swiftly without ever stumbling. People just called her the midwife. They had called her that for so long, that many in the village no longer remembered her real name. She had a healing touch. She had saved many mothers through nights that seemed entirely hopeless, had patted the backs of purple, lifeless infants until they burst into tears, and had quietly carried away the frail babies who died prematurely to bury them, while the mother still lay inside the house, her throat raw from screaming. But the midwife was ugly. So ugly that children shrieked at the sight of her, and weak-spirited women recoiled if they bumped into her unexpectedly. Her face was darkly tanned, heavily pockmarked, the old scars raised and pitted like hill dirt gouged out by floodwaters. So she always kept her head tightly wrapped, leaving only her eyes visible. The compassionate villagers said she was just being thoughtful, afraid her face would terrify the laboring women. The cruel ones called her the pockmarked ghost hag behind her back. She never argued. She just came when people needed her, did the work, took her payment and left. In the past she accepted rice and corn. For about the last year she had changed her fee to a pair of chickens, one rooster and one hen. The village was poor, but giving birth was a massive event, so every family scraped together the payment. No one thought it strange for long. They figured an old woman living alone needed something to raise in her yard, needed a chicken to trade for salt or oil, needed a bit of flesh and blood to get through the cold season. No one knew that inside her black cloth sack, aside from towels, a small knife, medicinal leaves, tying thread and a midwife's tools, there was also a dark void as deep as a wild beast's throat, always open, always starving. The midwife stepped through the door. The eyes beneath her scarf swept rapidly across the room, stopping instantly at the hearth, the water basin, the curtain, and the moaning woman inside, before she commanded in a low, raspy voice, "Boil. More water. Where are the clean cloths? Put them here. The fire must not go out. The men stand outside. The mother-in-law stay to help me." No one dared to argue. The curtain was dropped. Inside, the young woman lay curled up, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes bulging with pain, her legs trembling beyond her control. The midwife sat down, placing one cold bony hand on the mother's belly, adjusting her scarf with the other, her voice a steady drone. "Look at me. Breathe deep. Don't look up at the roof beams. Don't call out random names. If it hurts, cry out, but you must listen to me." The laboring woman gripped her wrist like a drowning person clinging to a wooden stake in a flood. Her fingernails dug into the skin, but the midwife didn't flinch. Beneath the scarf her nostrils flared slightly. The scent of a woman's birthing blood had begun to rise, hot, metallic, pungent, mixed with the smell of sweat, boiling water, kitchen ash, and fear. To a normal person, that smell would make their stomach knot. To her, it was like the scent of overripe fruit in the middle of a famine, the smell of a feast placed right at her lips, but which she was forced to wait for. Her eyes darkened. The tip of her tongue slithered across her teeth, slow, ravenous, yet her voice remained chillingly calm. "Push. That's right. Don't let go. The child is coming down." Outside the curtain, the young husband listened to his wife scream until his knees turned to water. Every time he reached out to pull back the curtain, his father held his shoulder and shook his head. The old man had witnessed many births in the village. He knew there were moments when the more a man cared, the more useless he was. He could only stand there, facing the ancestral altar, his lips mumbling prayers, so old that he himself couldn't hear them clearly. The mother-in-law inside the room wiped the sweat from her daughter-in-law while watching the midwife. She saw that the midwife's hands were very firm, very precise, like hands that had done this 100 times. But for some reason, every time the firelight cast a glow on the veil covering her face, she got the feeling that beneath it wasn't a human mouth pursed in concentration, but something wet, long, lying in wait. She shivered, then silently scolded herself for such morbid thoughts. This woman was saving her grandchild. How could she think such things? Over 2 hours later, when the sky outside had turned a deep purple, the cry of a newborn erupted. It was small, sharp, fragile, but enough to make everyone in the house feel as if a great fire had just been lit inside their hearts. The young husband collapsed right outside the curtain, burying his face in his hands, weeping. The father-in-law turned away, wiping his tears with the hem of his shirt. The mother-in-law clasped her hands, bowing to the heavens, the earth, and the ancestors. A moment later, the midwife carried the baby out, wrapped in a white towel, holding it up for everyone to see. "A boy," she said. Those 2 words made their joy burst like a breaking dam. The young husband reached out, wanting to touch his son, then pulled his hand back, afraid his hands were too dirty, afraid that even a rough touch would hurt the crying little life. The midwife turned back and placed the baby on its mother's chest. The mother's face was deathly pale from exhaustion, her lips dry and cracked, her breath shallow, but when she saw the red newborn infant lying against her heart, she still managed to force a smile. It wasn't a complete smile of happiness. It was the smile of someone who had just been dragged right to the threshold of death, who could still hear the black waters churning behind her back, but who now had a tiny hand anchoring her to life. The midwife instructed them to keep him warm, avoid the wind, not let too many strangers in, and keep the fire burning all night. Then she bent down to clean up the placenta, wrapping it into her black bag. The family asked where she was taking it. She answered naturally, to bury it. A child must have a place to bury its umbilical cord, and a placenta, bury it in village soil so he will have roots. Those words were so familiar. In this village, people believed the placenta was the root of a human being. Buried in the wrong place, the child would grow up prone to losing its soul, or prone to sickness, prone to longing for places it didn't belong. The midwife spoke according to custom, in the exact tone of someone who had done this her entire life, so no one questioned her further. The father-in-law brought out a pair of chickens, a rooster and a hen, their legs tied carefully, and handed them to her in gratitude. She accepted them, nodded, gave a few more instructions, and then, as the night laid thick upon the roof, she refused an escort home. "I've walked this path my whole life. I could get back blindfolded." She carried the still warm black bag, and the weakly struggling chickens, stepping out of the firelight and walking straight into the night. The family stood watching her silhouette disappear behind the trees, their hearts full of nothing but gratitude. None of them saw that, once she was a safe distance from the house, her back hunched over slightly, her footsteps quickened, and her shoulders trembled softly. Not from the cold. She was laughing. The road back to her house was pitch black. On either side were thickets, cornfields, and low bushes loud with the chirping of insects. The night wind swept through the corn leaves, making a rustling sound like countless dry hands rubbing together. Beneath the scarf, the midwife's eyes flashed a sickening green. She didn't need a torch To her, darkness wasn't an obstacle, it was familiar flesh. Every time the scent of blood rose from the black bag, she brought it close to her nose, taking a long, slow, deep breath until her chest expanded. The corners of her mouth grew wet. Drool soaked into the edge of the fabric. The tongue inside her mouth slithered over her teeth, longer than human tongue, soft, red, ravenous. Her house sat hidden behind the cornfield, its back to the forest, its face toward the cemetery. An old wooden stilt house, raised high, its walls blackened by smoke, the doors shut tight. Gloomy by day, by night, it looked like a forgotten cave. She pushed the door open. It creaked with a dry snap like a breaking bone. There were no lamps inside, no fire, but she could see every single thing clearly. The wooden table, the basin of fermented rice water in the corner, the old mirror hanging at the head of the bed, a few neatly stacked bundles of firewood, and the very faint scratch marks on the floor that a normal person would mistake for rat claws. She set the 2 chickens down, placed the black bag on the table, and ripped off her headscarf. The pockmarked face that the villagers saw by day began to convulse. The dark leathery skin melted like wet mud, the corners of her mouth stretched wide, rows of sharp white teeth gradually revealed themselves, her eyes shifted from green to red. The pupils slit in vertically like a beast's. Her throat let out a low groan, half ecstatic, half starved. She opened the bag. The stench of the placenta, the hot blood, the scent of a newly delivered woman, the smell of life freshly severed from its mother's body wafted up. She closed her eyes and shuddered. Then, unable to hold back any longer, she plunged her face into the bag, slurping up the bloody red mess, swallowing down the warm, soft, slimy, metallic chunks. The wet slurping sounds echoed in the pitchy black house like a beast tearing into prey beneath the floorboards. In mere moments the bag was licked clean. She licked every drop of blood stuck to the edges of the bag, licked her fingers, her wrists, sucked on the blood-soaked threads as if mourning the loss of the last drop of flavor. Too little, she whispered, her voice no longer that of an old woman. Still so hungry. Her eyes slid over to the 2 chickens. She picked them up, bringing her nose close to inhale their scent. To a normal person the smell was nauseatingly foul. To her it was the smell of life about to be cracked open. She plucked the feathers from their necks with her teeth, bit down hard, and sucked their blood until both birds were completely dry, their legs stiff if nice and straight. Then she devoured the meat, the soft bones, the organs, leaving nothing on the floor but a tuft of feathers and a few scattered scraps. After eating, she sat sprawled on the ground, exposing a pale, swollen belly to the moonlight slipping through the cracks in the wall, rubbing it slowly like a creature temporarily full but not at all satisfied. In her mind she pictured the newborn baby boy, his pink skin, his hot blood, his little thighs, his fragile cries. The craving coiled inside her like a nest of awakened snakes. She wanted to eat the flesh of the living, especially children. Placentas were delicious. Chicken blood was warm, her dead fetuses were nourishing, but all of that was just scraps compared to her true hunger. What she craved was blood still running in the veins, flesh still warm, a cry still caught in the throat, but she didn't dare yet, not out of pity. Her kind didn't use the word pity the way humans did. She was afraid, afraid of torches, afraid of bamboo spikes, afraid of nets, afraid of talismans. Afraid of the screams of people from a night long ago when the entire mountainside was glowing red with fire and an exorcism talisman burned her shoulder so badly the flesh charred. She wasn't a midwife. She was a fit fong, demonic spirit that wore human skin, feeding on blood, feeding on souls, feeding on the softest, most vulnerable parts of life. In her old village, a shaman's grandson had caught her eating human flesh. The boy ran back to tell, but before he could finish his sentence, she sucked out his soul. He went mad, spending his days scratching his face and calling out names no one could hear. The old shaman found out and rallied the villagers to hunt her down. That night torches lit up the whole forest. Hunting dogs barked their throats raw. Men carried pitchforks, bamboo spears, and machetes. Women threw kitchen ash and salt. Children were locked inside. The Fifong ran and shrieked, one of her shoulders struck by the old shaman's talisman. Smoke billowed from her flesh, the charred stench haunting her for weeks. She escaped, but the wounds and the terror chased her across many peaks, many valleys. She ate live frogs to survive, drank rainwater pooled in rocks, slept in trees like an animal. Finally she arrived at this village. From the top of a tall tree she observed for many nights, and realized this village had no shaman. The people trusted the midwife. The real midwife lived alone, was ugly, kept to herself, and constantly came into contact with birthing blood, placentas, and newborns, a perfect identity. Her chance came the night the real midwife delivered a baby for a family in the village, but the premature infant died. The old woman carried the small cloth bundle through the cemetery to the plot of land reserved for souls who never got to live. She dug the hole, crying as she buried it. The real midwife loved those children. Every time a baby died prematurely, she buried it herself, praying for it not to be cold, not to get lost, and if it reincarnated, to find a better home. The Fifong hid in the bushes, smelling the blood, the amniotic fluid, the scent of the mother's crushing grief still clinging to the midwife's clothes, and the starvation of many days on the run made her eyes glow red. She lunged. Claws tore through the dark, teeth sank into the neck. The real midwife died before she could even scream. Her bare blood drained until her body was nothing but a weightless, dry husk. The Fifong looked at that pockmarked face, memorizing every line, every pitted scar, and used her dark magic to shapeshift into her. Before leaving she even dug up the fresh grave, dragging the bundled dead infant up to eat it on the spot, indifferent to the dirt clinging to her lips. The real midwife's corpse was dragged to a deep ravine and kicked over the edge. From that day on, the village only had one midwife, who always kept her face heavily veiled, who took placentas as her fee, who volunteered to bury the dead infants, and who every night used fermented rice water to wash away her false face. A year passed and trust was built on habit. People do not suspect the person who brought their children into the world. People do not look closely at the eyes beneath the scarf. People do not ask why the dogs never dared to come near her house. Humans usually only fear the strange. Very few are lucid enough to fear what they have grown accustomed to calling by a kind name. By day the fiend still lived like a lonely old woman. She hoed the earth, planted corn, raised chickens, dried firewood, built fences. Her house was hidden away. Adults rarely visited unless they had business. But the children loved the place. The village kids weren't taught to be kind, or if they were they didn't listen. They called her the pockmarked ghost hag, threw rocks onto her roof, tossed snakes into her yard, drew demon faces on her fence. Some even hung a rotting dead frog on her door to see if she'd get scared. The Fifong didn't react much. To her those children were like flies buzzing around a feast. annoying but not yet worth revealing herself over. She only built her bamboo fence higher, sharper, both to keep the buffaloes from ruining her garden, and to keep the brats from getting too close. But among that group, there was a boy named Chan. Chan was the kid the whole village both hated and dreaded. He was 12 or 13, utterly obese, his face always smug, his smile insolent, as if he didn't understand the line between a prank and a crime. His parents only had one son, so they spoiled him rotten. He once fed grilled laffa to someone's dog, making all its teeth fall out. He once fed poisonous leaves to a buffalo, almost costing a family their prized beast. He ruined crops, smashed water jars, and chased people's chickens into the forest. Every time he got scolded, his parents would just bring money or rice to compensate. People cursed behind his back that feeding Shan was a waste of rice, that he was worse than a buffalo, that at least knew how to pull a plow. Hearing this, Chan thought they were afraid of him. He grew even more arrogant, declaring himself the tiger of the village, afraid of no man, no ghost, no graveyard. And the ugly midwife living alone became the perfect target for him to prove he was braver than the rest. One brightly moonlit night, Chan gathered his friends, bringing lanterns through the cemetery, cutting across the cornfield to the midwife's house to scare her. They blew out their lanterns outside the fence, creeping like a pack of baby rats. Chan brought a bag of feces, intending to throw it through her window. He said he had to show the pockmarked ghost hag who the real tiger was. His friends snickered. A scrawny kid crouched down to let Chan step up onto the fence. His fat body struggled over the bamboo, creaking so loudly the group almost burst into laughter. Inside the yard, it was dark. The stilt house was dead silent. Chan approached the window, his heart pounding fast, but his ego anchored his feet. Suddenly from beneath the floorboards came a rustling sound. He froze. Under the dim moonlight, a black creature had its back turned to him, its head bowed, eating something. The chewing sounds were wet, tough and crunchy. The smell of blood and scorched hair drifted through the air. Chan held his breath, but his stomach, churning with fear, betrayed him and a small fart slipped out. The creature whipped around. A pair of glowing green eyes stared straight at him. Not the eyes of a dog, not the eyes of a cat, and not the eyes of a human. It was something in between, possessing both the instinct of a beast and the memory of someone who knows how to hold a grudge. Chan backed away, hiding the bag of feces behind his back. Outside, his friends called out, "Chan, what's taking so long? The mosquitoes are eating us alive." The creature leaped instantly into the shadows. Right at that moment, a raspy voice rang out from the window. "Who's doing what out there?" The midwife poked her head out. Under the moonlight, her pockmarked face looked more horrifying than ever, her eyes glaring, her scarf slipping just enough to reveal a wet, glistening mouth. Chan screamed, dropped the bag of feces and turned to run. He scrambled over the fence, but his leg caught on a sharp bamboo tip, tearing a long gash down his calf. Blood soaked down his pant leg. He was in blinding pain, but he kept running because right then he was more afraid of ghosts than he was of pain. The whole group bolted through the cornfield, through the cemetery, only stopping to pant heavily when they were far away. His friends saw Chan's wet pants and fell over laughing. "Did you piss your pants, tiger?" Chan thumped his chest, trying to laugh it off. "This scratch is nothing. It'll heal in a few days." But back there in the midwife's yard, the Fifong stepped out to the fence, smelling the fresh blood still lingering on the bamboo. She swiped her finger through the blood and brought it to her mouth, sucking it slowly. The taste of a child's blood was warm, sweet, alive. It wasn't like chickened blood, wasn't like placenta, wasn't like a cold corpse. Her eyes lit up. Then she stepped on the bag of feces Chan had left behind. The putrid stench rose, making her face contort. The Fifon could eat things that normal humans found repulsive, but she absolutely loathed the filthy waste touching her territory. Her house, except when she was feeding, was always immaculate, free of dust, free of trash. A brat trying to throw that into her house wasn't just a prank, it was an insult. To the demon, an insult is a debt. And if the debt bled so fragrantly, it was all the more deserving to be paid in teeth. That night, the Tiffy thing went inside and washed her face with the fermented rice water. The pockmarked visage melted away, revealing the face of a young woman, flawlessly pale, coldly beautiful, her eyes flashing between green and red in the moonlight. She looked in the mirror, touched the scar on her shoulder, where the talisman had burned her, and smiled. In the mirror, that smile was both beautiful and hollow. "The tiger of the village," she whispered. "Let's see if a tiger cub tastes better than a placenta." Chan's wound didn't heal in the following days. It festered. He ran a fever, his leg throbbed, and he limped. The village healer came to apply poultices. The fever broke, but the wound still ached as if something were gnawing at it from the inside. His parents were in the middle of the corn harvest. Their fields were deep in the mountains, taking a long time to travel back and forth, and some days they had to sleep in the hut to guard against wild boars. Before leaving, his mother warned him. "At night, remember to lock the front door and windows. Don't open them for anyone. Don't go messing around anymore." Shan gave a half-hearted nod. By day his friends came over, cooking cornmeal, hauling water, telling stories, laughing, make him feel like he was still the tiger. By night, when the house was completely empty, the sound of the wind slipping through the wooden slats, the creaking of the trees, the skittering of rats on the roof, everything suddenly sounded like strange footsteps. For several nights, right at dusk, there were rustling noises around the house. Sometimes light footsteps on the roof. Sometimes a snuffling, sniffing sound beneath the floorboards. One night he clearly heard claws scraping against the wall, slowly screeching as if whatever was outside wasn't in a hurry to get in but merely wanted him to know he was being waited for. Hanging in front of the door was a basket of old soldiers' leaves, a type of plant his father had picked to ward off evil. Every time the scratching got close to the door, it would stop, then move to a different wall. Chan hid under his blanket, shaking like a wet dog, but come morning, he didn't dare tell anyone, afraid his friends would mock him for pissing his pants again. One morning when his friends came over, one of them smelled a putrid stench coming from the leaf basket. He opened it, and found a rotten, dead rat swarming with black flies. He took the whole basket and threw it out, forgetting to pick fresh leaves. Chan scolded him weakly for show, then got roped into sneaking some corn wine. The kids grilled fish, ate sticky rice, drank and hollered until the afternoon. Chan was dead drunk. He woke up as dusk was falling and kicked his friends out, telling them to go home. They stumbled away laughing, leaving behind cold, stinking grilled fish, scattered bones, spilled wine, kitchen ash, and the smell of drunk children and leftover food. Chan gathered it all and threw it out into the garden. Right at that moment the midwife walked past his gate. She Stop. The scarf covered her face, but her eyes stared straight into the house. Is that Sean? How is your leg? He jumped. Thinking she hadn't recognized him in the dark the other night, he called back out. It's better. Where are you come back from, Granny? The midwife didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept over the floor, over the kitchen, over the empty leaf basket, by the wall, beneath her sleeves. Her hands trembled ever so slightly with excitement. Are your parents home tonight? Anne answered casually. No. They won't be back until tomorrow. The second he said it, he knew it was wrong. A strange question, a strange silence. He opened his mouth to say more, but when he looked out, the midwife had vanished behind the cornstalks. A cold chill crept up the back of Shaz's neck. He hurriedly shut the front door, bolted it, locked both windows, threw more wood on the fire for light, and crawled into bed, telling himself the midwife was just asking. It was nothing. But outside, the warding basket was empty. Beneath the floorboards, a black shadow leaped over the fence as light as smoke. In the middle of the night, Sean woke up to the sensation of something freezing cold pinning down his arms and legs. He opened his eyes, but his body couldn't move. His throat felt like it was being crushed. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The dying firelight from the hearth illuminated the pockmarked face of the midwife leaning directly over him. But that face was no longer human. Her mouth drooled, a long tongue slithered across his cheek, cold, slimy, leaving a sensation on his skin like a venomous slug crawling over it. The stench of rotting grilled fish, blood, damp earth, and wild beast breath blasted into his face. From her mouth, a charred fish head was spat out, landing on the mat. She chuckled softly. You boys burned the fish too much. It doesn't taste good. Then, two fangs sank Sinjin's throat. Pain erupted like fire. He thrashed, but his chest felt as heavy as if crushed by a boulder. He wanted to call for his mother, wanted to call for his father, wanted to call for his friends, wanted to beg. But in that moment, the boy who once thought he feared nothing, realized that there are things in this world that do not care if you are a tiger or a mouse. They only care if your blood is still hot. The fire slowly died out. The house sank into darkness. Outside, the cornfield kept rustling. Inside, a small body lay motionless. A black shadow pinned it down, greedily drinking the sweet fragrant blood before ripping open the abdomen and feasting on the parts that were still warm. When Chan's parents unexpectedly returned in the middle of the night, because his mother had suddenly felt a burning anxiety she couldn't ignore, they only managed to catch a glimpse of a black shadow darting out of the window. The father grabbed his machete to give chase, but his wife's scream dragged him back. On the bed, Sean lay with his eyes wide open, his corpse sucked dry, his stomach hollowed out, the old blanket stained, dark with the clotted blood, the smell of urine, rot, and death mixed into a stench that nailed the father to the floor. The mother collapsed, hugging her child's body, screaming until her throat tore. The entire village lit up. People rushed over, some carrying torches, some holding knives, some wielding sticks. The village chief said it might have been a wild wolf, to keep the people from panicking. But even his own eyes darkened when he saw the claw marks on the window. The blood, the trail that stopped without footprints, and the corpse drained so completely that no wild beast could have done it. According to custom, a body eaten by a wild beast must be buried that very night, so the creature wouldn't memorize the scent and return. They stuffed straw into Chan's hollowed belly, washed him, dressed him in new clothes, and it buried him while the mist still hung white over the cemetery. His parents stood by the fresh grave, unable to comprehend why their only child, who just that afternoon was alive, drinking wine and laughing arrogantly, was now lying beneath the dirt. The night deepened. When everyone had left amidst the graves, a hooded figure stood before Chan's mound. Emerald eyes glowed in the mist. "Never bury someone killed by a fifong too shallowly," she whispered, cackling. "It will come back to eat the corpse." The grave dirt was still loose. Her claws sank in effortlessly. That night there was nothing intact left of Chan to return to his mother's dreams. 4 days after, Chan's mother dreamed every single night of her son standing outside the fence covered in dirt, crying, "Mom, they ate me, they ate everything. There's nothing left," she told her husband once, twice, and then and every single day. The father, heartbroken and utterly exhausted, finally took a hoe to the cemetery and dug up the grave, just so his wife would stop being tortured by the dreams. But beneath the grave there was only dirt, no body, no straw, no new clothes. The empty grave plunged the entire village into a terror that could no longer be covered up with the word wolf. Around the same time, another newborn died prematurely under the midwife's care. She said demons had snatched it, and volunteered to carry the baby away to bury it. Parents were too shattered, too weak, too trusting, so they let her take it. That night, inside the midwife's house, the baby was still crying. The cry barely erupted before it was swallowed by the darkness. From that day on, the village knew no peace. Dogs howled until dawn. Children ran inexplicable fevers. Pregnant women dreamed of an old hooded woman standing at the foot of their beds asking, "Is it time yet?" A night patrol was formed, but they only ever saw shadows, heard noises, smelled the stench of blood, and then lost the trail. The Fifong was getting annoyed. A year of hiding had built trust. One taste of living flesh had reawakened her addiction, making it stronger than before. Now forcing her to go back to eating placentas and chicken blood was like forcing someone who had tasted fine wine to chew on dry leaves. By day she stood among the villagers, listening to them talk about forest ghosts, wolves, demons, listening to them curse the thing that obvaked Chanla, while she felt both contempt and hunger. She knew they were terrified, but they didn't know who to be terrified of. She loved that. The most dangerous demon isn't the one that roars, but the one that stands in the middle of the crowd hunting it, nodding along with their words, sighing in pity alongside them, and being called by them with a familiar, endearing name. But the Fifong's mistake was that her hunger made her impatient, and the grief of Chan's mother had summoned something else. Old Bay from the end of the village went down to the lowlands to sell his old buffalo. While eating a bowl of noodles by the road, he recounted the story of his village to some merchants. A boy drained of blood, his organs eaten, his body stolen after burial. Infants dying prematurely, dogs howling, strange shadows in the cemetery. A passing shaman heard this and stopped. He was thin, his face gaunt, his beard speckled with gray, a bag of talisman around his neck, his eyes deep and cold like someone who had spent years staring far too long at things they shouldn't see. He grabbed Old Bay's arm, asking for every detail. When he heard about the placentas, the hooded midwife, the dead infants she carried off to bury alone, his jaw clenched. He was the shaman from the old village, the one whose grandson had his soul sucked dry by the Fifong. For the past year he had traveled through many villages. killing more than a few dark entities. But he had never found the exact one that drove his grandson mad to his death. He asked Old Bay to take him to the village, demanding no payment. In the way he only said, "If it's really her, your village must stay dead silent tonight. Do not let her know someone is looking back at her." The shaman met with the village chief in secret. He spoke of the Fifong, of how they steal identities, of their craving for the smell of blood, women in labor, children, the sick, of how they often hide in professions close to blood, like midwifery, fishing, or butchery. The village chief was over 60, a man who thought he knew this village down to every reef, every stream, every child. But when the shaman asked if anyone had changed in the last year, he fell silent for a long time. No strangers had arrived, no one had left. So if there was a demon, it had taken the face of someone inside the village. The Old Bay brought up the midwife. She used to be ugly but rarely covered her face so entirely. Lately she was always hooded. Every time she delivered a baby, she wrapped the placenta up and took it away. She always volunteered to bury the dead babies. The village chief hesitated. The real midwife had done great favors for many families. Almost everyone born in this village had passed through her hands. To suspect someone like her was like suspecting the very foundation of the village's peaceful memories. The shaman didn't push. He offered a way to test it. The Fifong was extremely sensitive to the smell of blood. All they had to do was sit near her with a frog whose 4 limbs had been clipped so it bled. She would find it hard to hide her craving. Furthermore, this creature used fermented rice water to maintain its human face. Before dawn they must wash their faces with that water to keep their beauty and their disguise. If a man simply stuck his hand in and stirred the basin, the water would lose its magic, and her face would distort. The plan was kept strictly under wraps. Old Bay pretended to visit the midwife to ask for advice about his pregnant niece, sitting near her with the bleeding frog in his basket. At first she acted normal, but within moments her hands trembled, her throat swallowed hard, the eyes beneath her scarf glowed green, her nostrils flared, and drool soaked the edge of her veil. Meanwhile another man sneaked into her house through the back, thrust his hand into the basin of fermented rice water, and vigorously swirled it. That night the Fifong returned home, her insides burning, agitated by the scent of the frog's blood and the news that someone was about to give birth. She washed her face as usual. The rice water had lost its magic. The midwife's face convulsed. Half of the pockmarked visage and half of the flawlessly pale maiden's face appeared, superimposed on each other, grotesquely warping like 2 faces fighting over a single skull. She realized she had been trapped. Her roar echoed across the cornfield, making every dog in the village howl. But the shaman was already waiting. That very night a woman genuinely went into labor. The Fifong was cold. She knew it could be a trap, but her hunger and her arrogance made her believe she was still faster than humans. After delivering the baby, she used her dark magic to make the parents believe the child was dead. Then carried the living infant at home, replacing it in the grave with a cloth-wrapped effigy. But this time, just as she set the baby down, washed her face with the ruined water, and parted her lips to enjoy her hot meal, the sound of people closing in echoed outside. Following the village chief's orders, the young men had silently surrounded the house with fishing nets, bamboo spears, torches, and talismans. The baby's father was there too, shaking so hard he almost collapsed. but he clamped a hand over his own mouth, terrified to cry out loud lest she kill the child. The Fifong heard the commotion, dropped the baby and crawled up the pillar to the roof like an animal. She kicked over a jar of kerosene, intending to burn the house down to create a smokescreen and escape. The flames roared red across the roof, but the shaman hurled a blue talisman. A loud sizzle rang out, the fire died instantly and the black smoke twisted in on itself as if being choked. The Fiafang lunged down. 1 second an old woman, the next a beautiful girl, the a four-legged beast with claws. She didn't scream meaninglessly. She was highly intelligent. She called out everyone's name, weaponizing their own memories to make them hesitate. She looked at a woman who had once lost a child, her voice tender. Your baby cried so sweetly before I ate it. The woman fainted on the spot. She looked at Chan's father, giving a blood-soaked smile. Your boy called for his mother at the very end, not his father. The father roared and charged forward, nearly breaking the line. The shaman shouted for them to hold the formation, because the Fifong didn't just kill with teeth and claws. She knew how to use the pain of the living as her escape door. The talisman-laced nets were thrown. She tore through the first layer but was snared by the second. Green blood sprayed out, the foul stench making several men vomit where they stood. The shaman stepped forward, holding a wooden stake carved with incantations, his eyes red with the memory of his grandson. In her final moments the Fifong reverted to the form of the beautiful girl, kneeling on the ground, her shoulders trembling, her voice as soft as water. Master, spare me, I was only hungry. Humans kill forest animals, eat their meat, drink their blood. Why does it make me a demon when I eat humans? The crowd fell dead silent. That question was venomous because it dragged evil down into the realm of the ordinary, making people, for a split second, see the shadow of blood in their own meals. The shaman looked at her. There was no pity. Because you know they hurt, and you still take joy in that pain, he said. Because you wear a human face to make them trust you. Because you don't just eat their flesh, you eat their faith. The Fitifan's eyes went wide. Her mouth gaped open, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. The shaman drove the wooden stake through her heart. The Fifong's final scream didn't sound like a human or a beast. It sounded like a multitude of crying children stuffed together inside a dog jar. She slumped over. They dragged her corpse into the house, piled up firewood, and lit the fire. As the house burned, thunder suddenly rolled across the sky. 7 bolts of lightning struck the foundation of the house. With each strike, the earth shook. The flames turned blue, and the smoke coiled into the shapes of distorted faces before dissipating. The shaman counted all 7 strikes before saying, "She is dead, her soul has been shattered." But no one cheered. Chan's father stood watching the fire, his face devoid of tears. Chan's mother sat slumped on the ground, clutching her chest, mumbling her son's name as if terrified that if she stopped calling, whatever was left of him would vanish too. The parents of the rescued baby held their child, trembling violently, not daring to believe the crying in their arms was real. The village chief stood before the blaze, his back having hunched over in just a single night. He survived, the village survived, but, from that moment on he understood that the most terrifying thing wasn't a demon crawling out of the forest, but the fact that the entire village had called it by a familiar endearing name for a whole year. The next morning the shaman set up an altar to perform a salvation ritual for the devoured souls. He chanted for a very long time. The incense smoke drifted across the cemetery, over the plot where the premature infants were buried, over Chan's empty grave, and over the blackened foundation of the midwife's house. The village chief asked the shaman to stay in the village. He agreed. They built an empty tomb for the real midwife, since her body could never be recovered from the deep ravine. From then on, every time someone in the village gave the birth, the placenta was buried immediately, right in front of the whole family. No midwife was ever allowed to walk alone at night. Children no longer dared to throw rocks at ugly people, not because they had suddenly become kind, but because they had learned that some ugly faces belong to those who suffer, while some gentle faces hide a mouth full of fangs. Years later, the cornfield behind the cemetery grew lush and green again. The site of the midwife's house remained a patch of scorched, black earth, where no plant would take root. On moonless nights, when the wind swept through the field, people could still hear a very faint licking sound coming from that spot, like a long tongue, searching for the scent of blood it had lost. But there was nothing left but cold ash, bone fragments, and the belated lullabies of mothers who had no children left to hold. As for the village chief, every time he heard the cry of a newborn in the village, he never smiled immediately, like he used to. He always looked toward the cemetery first, and only then would he let out a breath. Because he knew that some children survived, not because the village was strong, but because that one time the demon had been discovered just in time. And there were also children like Chan, like the infants swapped for cloth effigies, who would never be returned. Even if lightning struck 7 times, even if the demon was burned to ash, even if the living wept until they ran out of tears, justice that arrives late is no longer complete justice. It is merely a door closing after the room inside has already lost far too many cries.